Hello, reading room. I am here a little earlier than I said I was going to get on, a little later than I should be getting on. Our philosophical classroom or bookless classroom went a little bit long, as it has been. But I really needed to get my point out, and I did. Oh, what am I doing? We're here. It is day 223 in the classroom. We're here in the reading room, and we are reading the book, A Dangerous Idea by Debbie Levy. All right, let's get to it. We are on chapter number 15, Prayers and Chairs. Prayers and Chairs. 9 o'clock in the morning in the Rhea County Courthouse. Tuesday, day 3 of the trial. Stifling hot again. The previous night's storms had brought no relief. Time for prayer. Except, I object to prayer, Clarence said just as the minister was about to launch into it. Judge Ralston rejected Clarence's objection. It has been my custom since I have been judge to have prayers in the courtroom when it was convenient, he said, and I know no reason why I should not follow this custom. Clarence pressed on. One prosecutor jumped in, then another. A defense attorney stepped up, then another. Gentlemen, the judge pleaded, do not turn this into an argument. Too late for that. Clarence argued that the prayers would prejudice the jurors against the defense. Dudley Malone added that the types of prayers being offered were argumentative, and they increased the atmosphere of hostility to our point of view, which already exists in this community by widespread propaganda. Tom Stewart retorted, I would advise Mr. Malone that this is a God-fearing country, to which Malone, a Catholic, snapped, and it is no more God-fearing country than that from which I came. But the praying would proceed. Reverend Stribling invoked reverence to the great creator of the world, neatly making Clarence's and Malone's points about the tendency of the prayer to undercut the defense. The Reverend ended by asking for understanding and truth in the name of our blessed Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Arthur Hayes once again remained quiet. And that was it for the morning in the court. Judge Ralston announced that because the lights had been knocked out by the storm the night before, he'd been unable to finish writing his ruling on the defense's motion to quash. He was adjourning court until 1 p.m., but before he left the courtroom, if you want to make any pictures, boys, make them now, the judge said to the photographers. I will give you 15 minutes. Judge Ralston was always in good humor with the press. The good humor ended a few hours later. 1 o'clock came and went. 2 o'clock. The judge came into the courtroom at 2:15, grim. He'd heard that his opinion on the motion to quash had been leaked to the press. No one was supposed to know how he was ruling. If he said any reporter published an article disclosing what was in the ruling before he, Judge Ralston, read it from the bench, I will deal with them for contempt of court. That was the same thing with the ruling of Roe versus Wade. Exactly the same thing. Again, the judge left the courtroom. 3 o'clock came and went. Hundreds of people remained waiting for whatever came next. Spectators who couldn't find a seat crammed against the walls. The electric fans were even more useless than usual. The power was still out. The storm had also knocked out the town's drinking water. People refreshed themselves with soda pop sold by boys who wriggled through the mass of humanity. Finally, Judge Ralston returned. It was 3:45. Now he was hopping mad, but before the judge could vent, Arthur Hayes broke his silence on the prayers he'd been enduring. He and the defense team had gathered a distinguished group of representatives from various religious organizations asking the court to choose clergy who were not affiliated with the fundamentalist churches to present the devotions at the opening of court each day. As Hayes stood to read the request, prosecutor Tom Stewart shut up. "I submit that is absolutely out of order," he said. "Mr. Stewart," Hayes began. Stewart cut him off. Hayes tried again. "Will you please keep your mouth shut?" Stewart yelled, and he wasn't even the one who came to court angry that afternoon. Judge Ralston let Hayes read the petition. Stewart objected. "With all the vehemence of my nature." The judge decided that the Dayton Pastors Association would choose the clergymen who would deliver the prayers for the rest of the trial. He would have no say in the matter, so no one could accuse him of influencing the jury. Now he'd get back to his own anger. "I am now informed," Judge Ralston said unhappily, "that the newspaper and the large cities are being now sold, which undertake to state what my opinion is." He'd been scooped. The judge was so upset that he refused to issue his ruling. "Nope. You could read about it in the big city newspaper, but it wasn't real because he hadn't formally ruled. He'd spent 4 hours writing it," he said, which absolutely exhausted him. He adjourned court for the day and appointed a committee of journalists to investigate who had stolen his thunder. Oh, I hate when I do that. Hold on, I need to close that door because that's noisy over there. Lucy, quiet. Quiet. Sit down. Sit down. Okay, so here we have the Atlanta Constitution offered a perspective on the goings on in the courtroom. And so here we've got the monkey trial with a bunch of monkeys all over the place in the courtroom. The way some people see it, and then it says the Scopes case in one of the monkey's hands. And then we've got soda pop stands at Dayton had real day. Noted the drop head and the newspaper reflecting the oppressive heat in Judge Ralston's courtroom on July 14th, 1925. I don't know. I was trying to get had real day, but had their day or whatever. That's probably what they mean. Anyway, moving on. The next morning, Wednesday, July 15th, was as hot as the day before, maybe even hotter, but Judge Ralston was no longer so steamed up. Attorney General Stewart, too, seemed to have cooled off and apologized to Arthur Hayes for telling him to shut his mouth. A Unitarian minister visiting from New York City to consult with the defense gave the opening prayer. It was about as unfundamentalist as a prayer could be, 2 sentences long with no mention of the Creator. This didn't stop John Randolph Neal from renewing an objection to prayer in the courtroom and presenting his reasons in a little speech, which prompted Sue Hicks of the prosecution team to speak for the first time to reproach the defense for the constant heckling every morning, which led the judge to muse that any religious society that is worthy of the name should believe in God and believe in divine guidance, which induced Clarence to object. At least nobody was shouting. Judge Ralston asked for the findings of the investigating committee of journalists. "It has been ascertained," began Richard Beamish, a well-known Pennsylvania journalist who headed the committee, "that the reporter who sent out the bulletin divulging how the judge would rule did not obtain the information in any improper or unethical manner." That was vague. I think the court is entitled to know how this information was had, Judge Ralston said. This was delicate. Upon investigation, Beamish said, we find that the information came from the court. Well, said the judge, the color drained from his face. He seemed dumbfounded. He was the court. He'd outed himself. It wasn't some lawless reporter who broke into his office and sneaked a peek at the opinion. No, there was no lawlessness. It happened like this. After Judge Ralston adjourned court the day before, explaining that he'd been delayed by the power outage, John Scopes and a young reporter named William K. Hutchinson walked over to the Hotel Aqua to have lunch together. They strolled with the judge for part of the way. No, it is not normal for a judge and a criminal defendant in a court to stroll and chat together on their way to lunch. Gesturing toward a bundle of papers the judge was carrying, Hutchinson asked, is that your decision on the motion to quash? No, said Judge Robinson. That's being copied by the stenographer now. Will you read that decision this afternoon? The reporter followed up. That is my intention. Then after you adjourn until tomorrow, you'll take up the admissibility of expert testimony next? Hutchinson asked. Yes, the judge responded, and that's where he gave himself away. For if the judge had granted the defense's motion to quash the indictment, the case would be over. There would be nothing to take up next. The judge went on to his Tuesday lunch completely unaware of what he had just divulged. William Hutchinson ran off to call in his scoop, arrived by the power of inductive thinking to his editors. Then he and John had their lunch. Now it was Wednesday morning, and the mystery was solved. Judge Ralston recovered his composure. He was ready to issue the opinion whose conclusion was already known to the world, or at least to the newspaper reading world. But first, if you gentlemen want to take my picture, take it now, he told the news photographers. Clearly he held no grudge against the press. Clearly he was still in no hurry to move things along. For 5 minutes, the judge posed as if reading the 19-page typed document on which he'd expended so much effort, and then he read it aloud for real. Finally, the Butcher Act, Judge Ralston said, was a perfectly valid piece of legislation. It didn't violate a teacher's freedom of religion or speech or thought under the Tennessee Constitution. It didn't violate anyone's rights under the U.S. Constitution. If a teacher didn't want to abide by the Butler Act, and if his conscience constrains him to teach the evolution theory, he could find other employment. So much for Clarence's warning about the slippery slope to chaos. The real trial could begin. After a lunch break, that is. This has required quite a bit of energy, as you must know, said Judge Ralston, for the court to read the opinion that has just been delivered in the atmosphere by which he was surrounded. In the afternoon, the jury was finally brought in. The courtroom was so crowded that some of the newspaper reporters couldn't find seats. Can we have chairs, Judge? One called out. Prosecutor Ben McKenzie had a similar problem. I wish at this time to ask the court to make the announcement to the people and ask them that they not carry off chairs of the attorneys, he said. We are a necessary evil in the courtroom. The official record of the trial reported the outcome. The policeman announced that no chair should be carried off from the attorneys from either the state or the defense or the press. Then another voice piped up. I would like to make the request, the unanimous request of the jury, the foreman said, to take up the matter of some electric fans here. This heat is fearful. While I think I could stand my part of it, the judge said he didn't have the authority to get more fans. Ben McKenzie said that he didn't think Rhea County had the funds to install additional fans. Dudley Malone said he would buy some. The judge said he would share his fans with the jury. At last. What is your plea, gentlemen? Judge Ralston asked. Guilty or not guilty? Chapter 16, 4 witnesses and a textbook. John Randolph Neal answered for John. Not guilty, may it please your honor. Now is the time for the two sides to make their opening statements. Attorney General Stewart's was all of 2 sentences. Basically, he said John taught evolution in a public school, which necessarily denied the biblical story of creation, and that was what they would prove, and that was against the law. The end. Dudley Malone's opening statement was longer. He was setting the stage for the strategy the defense team had formulated. First, to educate the court, and while they were at it, the larger world, on the meaning of evolution. The prosecution had twice since the beginning of the trial referred to man as descended from monkeys, he said. This may be the understanding of the theory of evolution of the prosecution, a dig at their faulty scientific understanding. No scientist of any preeminent standing today holds such a view. The second prong of the defense's strategy was to show that teaching evolution was not the same as denying the biblical story of creation. If, for example, you believe that a single day in the Genesis story meant something other than 24-hour day, you could reconcile an earth on which life had been evolving for millions of years with the days of creation in the Bible. There might be a conflict, Malone admitted, between evolution and the peculiar ideas of Christianity, which are held by Mr. Bryan as the evangelical leader of the prosecution. But Will Bryan, Malone said, was not an authorized spokesman of the Christians of the United States. Malone hammered away at Will for a while until Tom Stewart objected. Judge Ralston agreed. I do not think Mr. Bryan's personal views are involved in this case, he said. That was probably news to the people in the courtroom. It was likely news to anyone who knew anything about the case. It may even have been news to Will Bryan, who had promised a duel to the death and whose personal views were stamped all over the case. He spoke for the first time. I ask no protection from the court, Will said. Loud applause broke out around the courtroom. Spectators stamped their feet, whistled, and cheers. The judge warned them he'd have to throw them out if they didn't settle down. I cannot tolerate any expression of feeling on the issues in this case at all in the presence of the jury. Malone finished up his statement, and the prosecution put on its first witness. Just state in your own words, Howard, said Tom Stewart, what he taught you and when it was. Howard Morgan, 14 years old, had been a student of Professor Scopes as Stewart anointed John in a freshman general science class. It was along about the 2nd of April, Howard began. Of this year, prompted Stewart. Yes, sir, of this year. Howard sounded nervous in his white shirt with top buttons open and white duck pants. He dressed as well as he could for the heat, but being in the hot seat, the witness stand was an oversized high-back chair with a hard bench upon a square pedestal opposite the judge's seat was intimidating. Wide-eyed, he carried on. He said that the earth was once a hot molten mass, too hot for planet or animal life to exist upon it. In the sea, the earth cooled off. There was a little germ of one-cell organism formed, and this organism kept evolving until it got to be a pretty good-sized animal, and then came on to be a land animal, and it kept on evolving, and from this was man. Go to the head of the class, interjected Arthur Hayes. That is the theory that he taught you, Stewart prompted the teenager, about a man being a little germ and sprouting in the sea and so forth and finally culminating and coming out on dry land? Not really, but it was the sort of silly summary that could appeal to a room full of anti-evolutionists. Stewart moved on. I ask you further, Howard, he said. How did he classify man with reference to other animals? What did he say about them? Well, said Howard, the book and he both classified man along with cats and dogs, cows, horses, monkeys, lions, horses, and all that. What did he say they were? Mammals. Classified them along dogs, cats, horses, monkeys, and cows? Yes, sir. And so the prosecutor understood John Scopes' offense, lumping man with other animals. When Clarence's turn to cross-examine Howard came, he decided to have a little fun. He didn't say he was a cat the same as a man, Clarence asked the boy. No, sir. He said man had a reasoning power that these animals did not. Howard Morgan, a student of John Scopes, testifying on Wednesday, July 15th, 1925. I'm going to change Clarence Darrow's accent in a minute. There is some doubt about that, Clarence countered wryly. That drew a laugh from the audience. Clarence asked Howard whether he remembered what made a mammal, but Howard didn't remember. No matter. But he said that all of them were mammals, Clarence asked. All what? Dogs and horses, monkeys, cows, man, whales. I cannot state all of them, but he said all those were mammals? Clarence repeated. Yes, sir, Howard stated. But I don't know about the whales. He said all these other ones. More laughter. Well, did he tell you anything else that was wicked? Now everyone chuckled. The judge and prosecutors, even Will Bryan's face relaxed. After all, everyone who knew John Scopes knew that wicked was not a word that fit. Howard shot his teacher a look and smiled. No, he replied. Not that I remember of. Now that is about what he taught you, Clarence said, is it has not hurt you any, has it? Here, let me do that sentence again. Now that is about what he taught you. It has not hurt you any, has it? That got the room laughing again. No, sir. That's all. The other student Stewart called to the witness stand was 17-year-old Harry Shelton. Harry Budd, to his friends, confirmed that John used George William Hunter's A Civic Biology textbook in his class. On cross-examination, he told Clarence that the only thing he remembered learning about evolution and biology was that all forms of life originated from a single cell. So here is a civic biology, correctly classified human beings as mammals, as Howard Morgan recalled in his cross-examination by Clarence Darrow. So here is the page from the book about evolution and classifying man as mammals. I'm going to actually read it. Man's place in nature. Although we know that man is separated mentally by a wide gap from all other animals, in our study of physiology, we must ask where we are to place man. If we attempt to classify man, we see at once he must be placed with the vertebrate animals because of his possession of a vertebral column. Evidently, too, he is a mammal because the young are nourished by milk secreted by the mother, and because his body has at least a partial covering of hair. Anatomically, we find that we must place man with the ape-like mammals because of these numerous points of structural likeness. The group of mammals, which includes the monkey, apes, and man, we call the primates. Although anatomically there is a greater difference between the lowest type of monkey and the highest type of ape than there is between the highest type of ape and the lowest savage, yet there is an immense mental gap between monkey and man. Instincts. Mammals are considered the highest of vertebrate animals, not only because of their complicated structure, but because their instincts are so well developed. Monkeys certainly seem to have many of the mental abilities of man. Professor Thorndike of Columbia University sums up their habits of learning as follows. Columbia University, you mean like Columbia Pictures and Paramount Pictures and Universal Studios? In their method of learning, although monkeys do not reach the human stage of a rich life of ideas, yet they carry the animal method of learning by the selection of impulses and association of them with different sense impressions to a point beyond that reached by any other of the lower animals. In this too they resemble man, for he differs from the lower animals not only in the possession of a new sort of intelligence, but also in the tremendous extension of that sort which he has in common with them. A fish learns slowly a few simple habits. Man learns quickly an infinitude of habits that may be highly complex. Dogs and cats learn more than the fish, while monkeys learn more than they. In the number of things he learns, the complex habits he can form, the variety of lines along which he can learn them, and in the permanence when once formed, the monkey justifies his inclusion with man in a separate mental game. Evolution of man. Undoubtedly, there once lived upon the earth. Sorry about that. Too many unused voice patterns. Undoubtedly, there once lived upon the earth races of men who were much lower in their mental organization than the present inhabitants. If we follow the early history, and that's where it ends. So that's page 195 of a civic biology book. That is all you remember that he told you about biology, wasn't it? Yes, sir. Are you a church member? Clarence asked. Sir? The question seemed to surprise Bud. Are you a church member? Yes, sir, Bud replied. Do you still belong? Yes, sir. You didn't leave church when he told you all forms of life began with a single cell? That was the point. A student could learn about evolution, not that Bud Shelton seemed to have learned much about evolution, and still be an upstanding church-going boy. No, sir, Bud said. He had not abandoned Christianity. That is all, Clarence said. Hearing Howard's and Bud's testimonies, John thought, if the boys had got their review of evolution from me, I was unaware of it. I didn't remember teaching. Indeed, from his very first sit-down with the town leaders at Robinson's drugstore, John was waffled on this question. He waffled even as he confirmed that he used Hunter's A Civic Biology in class. But his shaky memory of whether he actually taught evolution hadn't stopped John from volunteering to the prosecution, to be prosecuted. It hadn't stopped the drugstore clique from presenting him into service as part of their scheme to draw the world's attention to Dayton. And now neither John nor his lawyers disputed the boys' claims that Professor Scopes had in fact taught the offending science. Clarence knew that a challenge to the Butler Act required John to say, or at least not to contradict, that he had taught evolution. After all, if John had not, there would be no reason to prosecute him. And without a prosecution, no one would be in Judge Ralston's court. The trial was something bigger than John, and as he later wrote, that was all right with me. He opposed the Butler Act and was willing to be the face of the challenge. The two adults called as witnesses by the prosecution were members of the drugstore group, Walter White, superintendent of schools, and Frank Robinson, school board member and drugstore owner. They both testified that at the drugstore meeting where it all began, John admitted teaching evolution from Hunter's A Civic Biology. Attorney General Stewart submitted the book into evidence as Exhibit 1 in the case, marking in particular 6 pages. There were pages 194 and 195. Page 194 had a section captioned The Doctrine of Evolution. Cross-examining Doc Robinson, Clarence read aloud from that page. Geology teaches that millions of years ago, life upon Earth was very simple, and that gradually more and more complex forms of life appeared as the rocks formed latest in time show the most highly developed forms of animal life. The great English scientist Charles Darwin, from this and other evidence, explained the theory of evolution. This is the belief that simple forms of life on Earth slowly and gradually gave rise to those more complex, and that thus ultimately the most complex forms came into existence. Yes, Doc Robinson confirmed that was what John said he taught in his biology class. What else was in the offending pages that the Attorney General had marked when he placed a civic biology in evidence to prove John's guilt? Page 195 asserted, although we know that man is separated mentally by a wide gap from all other animals, man also belonged to the group of mammals called primates, along with monkeys and apes. This was offensive, grouping man with monkeys. Attorney General Stewart also marked page 252 and 253. Page 252 had a diagram of cell reproduction as part of an explanation of heredity. Page 253 reintroduced the great Englishman Charles Darwin as one of the first scientists to realize that this great force of heredity applied to the development or evolution of plants and animals, as the textbook explained it. In nature, the variations which best fitted a plant or animal for life in its own environment were the ones which were handed down, because those having variations which were not fitted for life in that particular environment would die. Not a terrible summary of Darwin's natural selection. The last two pages the prosecution marked were 254 and 255, which focused on how plant cultivators could create new variations of crops, examples of artificial as opposed to natural selection. A photograph of 4 cobs of corn illustrated the improvements that might result. The prosecution rested its case. 4 witnesses and a textbook. Now it was the defense's turn. Now the jury could hear John tell his story. We will come back tomorrow on our 3 days on after I was start going on day 224, but today is 223, and we just got through with chapters 15 and 16 in our book about the Scopes Monkey Trial, A Dangerous Idea by Debbie Levy. Thanks so much for joining me. We are done with day 223 in the classroom. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Hopefully we gave you some things to think about. I think I did. In order to make your minds, your bodies, and your spirits healthier. Thanks again for joining me.